So basically, CBDC, yes. So CBDC is basically here to revolutionize fiat system. Then why the Pan African Payments and Settlement System, as the PAPSS, is here to revolutionize African cross-border trade. All right. So we have amazing set of speakers that will be handling this topic today. All right. So first, let me introduce the moderator of today's event. His name is Mr. Kayode Babarinde. So he's the executive director of Africa Blockchain Institute. And then Mr. Kayode holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy at the Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife in Nigeria. He also holds a master's in entrepreneurship education at the prestigious University of Ibadan, still in Nigeria also. And he's presently studying his PhD in technology entrepreneurship at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. All right, so I'll be handing the floor over to Mr. Kayode for him to moderate this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on exploring CBDC and the potentials of collaboration with the Pan-African payment system in Africa. Just a quick one about what we do, to protest what Michael said at Africa Blockchain Institute. We're basically working around building blockchain capacity across the continent. And what guides us in that regard is our three priorities. First is the blockchain education, where we get to run courses and also side programs to educate as many people as possible, both corporate and government organizations, on blockchain technology and how it can be of good use for them at the organizational level. Same also is the blockchain research, where we have been working and launched the Africa Blockchain Report, covered several countries of the continent and telling us what is going on in terms of blockchain technology, startups, and also the regulatory ecosystem space so far, to also inform many people both in and outside Africa on how best they can deploy the blockchain technology on the continent, and more for the government to see how best they can come up with a fair rule and regulation for blockchain startups or those already existing in space across the continent. So we launched the first edition, second edition, and also right now we're finishing up with the third edition across Africa. Then the last is the blockchain deployment, where we work with startups and also again corporate and multinationals that want to deploy blockchain technology, both public and private, to their organization. These are the three things that guide our priorities at the Africa Blockchain Institute. And aside this, also we have some side programs, which is the Africa Blockchain Incubation Program. We'll be running since last year, focus on Rwanda. This year we focus on Egypt and Zimbabwe. Next year we focus on Morocco, Ghana, and Botswana. And we can even open up the rest of the continent as well. And we have the Blockchain Summer Bootcamp, where we focus on teenagers during the long vacation in August, first week in August, to educate them as well on blockchain technology. I mean, we want to make sure we catch them young before they get to the university. Last year was done in Ghana, this year in Ethiopia, and we hope to expand to Zimbabwe by next year. And also the last is the Africa Blockchain Hackathon Program, where it's now open to as many people as possible, both policymakers, developers, and everyone that wants to come on board on blockchain technology. So today on the webinar, we'll be talking about exploring central bank digital currencies potential in facilitating the Pan-African payment settlement and system in Africa. So joining us in discussing this topic, which I feel is very interesting for as many people as possible, because those that sign up are actually from central banks, financial institutions, journalists, and also even technology organizations as well. That want to understand the central bank digital currency, especially the ecosystem on the continent, and also this the new platform with the PAPSS, the Pan-African Payment Settlement System in Africa. So joining me to discuss this topic today, we have Ms. Nwazi Ofe, which is the Deputy Director of the Financial Regulation and Supervision Digital Frontiers Institute. Welcome, Nwazi. And also we have Ms. Monica Oraro, who is the Head of Product and Business Development at the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. Welcome again, everyone. So at this point, I would like to begin by asking them to come on the panel and introduce themselves and also tell us about their organization and what they do as individual. So I would like to start with Noazi. Can please go ahead and please introduce yourself and let us know more about what you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Coyote. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Nola Zihlope, as Coyote said. I am originally from the Kingdom of Eswatini, and I'm joining you here from South Africa as Deputy Director with Digital Frontiers. I started with Digital Frontiers in 2020 in the thick of lockdown, and my work has involved curating content and leading the curation of our teaching content in financial regulation of digital financial services, financial regulation in the payment schemes, and payment services. So obviously along the way, we've looked at different aspects of financial inclusion, which include central bank digital currencies, which are front and center now, with especially the publication of the BIS a few days ago on CBDCs in Africa, and also looking at central bank digital currencies within the payments space, and considering your cryptocurrencies, your stable coins, learning over from the birth to life and death of Facebook's Libra/Diem. And so I'm very passionate about these subjects that we're discussing today, and I'm looking forward to your engagement through your questions live and the questions you've already submitted today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nawazi. And also over to Monica. Could you please unmute yourself and tell us about yourself? Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, good evening to you all. My name is Monica Oraro. I'm responsible for product and business development for PAPSS. I've been with PAPSS since September of last year, so just over a year. Before that, I was working with the central bank in Kenya, doing different initiatives on payments. So PAPSS is a central financial market infrastructure. The job that we're doing today, we believe is very key in being able to support the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And as a financial market infrastructure, we sit in between all the key players in payments, whether they are central banks or payment switches or commercial banks or fintechs, to connect them so that wherever you are, whatever corner you are in Africa, you are able to make payments seamlessly and using your local currency.
All right, thank you very much. So I will start the first question right now because I mean the participant also said some question ahead of time. Is Noazi, we are very curious. What's CBDC and why is actually why is it gaining some popularity? You are mute. Yes.
This is the proverb of Zoom these days. You're on mute. So the definition of a CBDC, has been of long conflict, and I'm settling on the definition of it from the Bank for International Settlements, or the BIS, which they defined in a publication of theirs from last year. So a central bank digital currency is what we can call digital money, but it separates itself from other forms of digital money like commercial bank money, e-money, cryptocurrencies, digital assets, or stable coins, in its nature that it is a national unit of account, and the fact that it is a liability of the central bank, same as the physical cash that you carry with you that has a serial number, which is also a liability of the central bank. So it's backed by the central bank, and it is a national unit of account. So it's sovereign to the nation that issues it. And there are two types of CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. So there are your wholesale central bank digital currencies, which are mainly used within the banking system in relation to the central bank to clear wholesale payments or your overnight clearing and settlement. Whereas your retail CBDCs, that's what the second type, for individual peer-to-peer payments or business-to-customer payments, your day-to-day transactions that we either use our bank cards for or our e-money for or our cash for, would be taken up by the retail CBDC space if they were to come into a jurisdiction or a market. Thank you. So in terms of the popularity part, you know, they started off with obviously the developed world gaining speed, from seeing the potential of application of technology, from the rise of cryptocurrencies, from Bitcoin with the white paper from Satoshi Nakamoto, and seeing that, well, this underlying blockchain technology, or even under the umbrella of distributed ledger technologies that have come up, has a potential to work in the formal financial space and actually make the payment systems more efficient. And hey, maybe we can take some of the technology from the decentralized financial system and bring it over to the centralized financial system because there are some benefits. And then further, after looking from that, there's been such a big rise to where the latest survey published by the BIS from 2017, where only 2/3 of countries that they surveyed were doing some form of CBDC work, from analysis to pilot testing. Now 90% of the same surveyed countries are doing some form of CBDC work. And when you look at emerging market economies like African countries, they surveyed 19 countries and they found that they are driven, and it's gaining popularity because of their number one priority, which is to increase financial inclusion. So the main motivator for African countries is CBDC is considered the silver bullet. And I would put a precaution there because, I mean, nothing's the silver bullet on its own for financial inclusion. Together with provision of cash in digital form and improving the effectiveness of monetary policy is what is pushing the popularity of CBDCs in Africa and also across the world. And so, and also then another factor that's pushing them as well, but is not so popular in emerging countries, is improving competition and efficiency in digital payment services. So this is why it's been gaining popularity and growing with such steam. And we're seeing so many projects launched around the world in CBDCs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we also need to dive more on the position of CBDC in Africa. Probably do we even need it, both from the wholesale and the retail part? But I guess we touch base on that as we move on. So I'd like to proceed to Monica. I mean, talking about PAPSS, it was launched fully in January in Accra, Ghana, and this is December 2022, like 1 year right now. We'd be glad to know what has been the trajectory so far, and for some of us on this call that also don't know what PAP does or what PAP is, it will be also a good time to tell us more about PAPSS. But again, what has been trajectory so far since January and now, this is a 1 year review.
All right, thanks very much, Kayode. So I think following the launch and even before the launch, there has been a lot of excitement about PAPSS, and I think this is tied to what people see as the potential of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So at the beginning of the year in January, we started, as you mentioned, with the launch in Ghana, in Accra, which is the home of the AFCFTA Secretariat, which is also driving the initiatives on the trade logistics side of the AFCFTA. And for us, we started in the West African Monetary Zone. So this consists of Ghana, Nigeria, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Gambia, and Guinea. So since then, we've had 2 more regions come on board through their countries, one in East Africa, which is Djibouti, another one in Southern Africa. So for us, that is allowing us to start expanding our reach beyond West Africa into other parts of Africa. In West Africa itself, we have been deepening the usage of PAPSS, and this is through connecting to the national switches, particularly those ones in Nigeria and Ghana. So there has been a lot of transactional activity taking place between these, especially between these two countries, as well as the other countries, the other 4 countries that form the West African Monetary Zone. So for those people who do not know about PAPSS, how I describe it is in the context of how we do payments today. So typically, for example, today, if today I am in Cairo, I'm in Egypt. If I wanted to send money to Nolwazi, then I would have to instruct my bank here in Egypt in the local currency, maybe Egyptian pounds. Then the transaction would go through the correspondent banking route. So it would go outside of Africa, most likely to the US if it's in dollars, with my correspondent looking for her correspondent, which takes time before it can eventually get to her in South Africa, and for it to be converted again from dollars into the rand. And typically that entire process can take, in the best case, days, in the worst case, even weeks. And of course, as it goes through all the different channels on the correspondent banking route, then it becomes more expensive. So what we're doing in PAPSS to make that journey very simple for people like us who want to send money between ourselves in the continent is with PAPSS, I can instruct my bank, my commercial bank, in the local currency, so in Egyptian pounds. It's received by PAPSS. PAPSS can then send the funds to Nolwazi in South Africa in rand. And today that would typically take about 120 seconds. So the added advantage is that, you know, we're using our local currencies, so there's no need to go into a third currency for the transaction. You have fewer parties in the transaction, just to my bank and her bank, which makes it an instant payment. And we're also able to guarantee that the payment gets to her as well. So that's what we are doing at PAPSS.
Now, interesting. We can't really wait to have merchants to actually practice that method I just mentioned, where they can actually send money to each other, buy goods and services in their local currency without passing through Forex for them to change the money, or even pass through the bank, as you mentioned, taking days or weeks before eventually they get to the final receiver. Okay, so we look forward on that. I would like to move forward to Nwazi. We have 2-in-1 question. First is, we just discussed about how CBDC is gaining popularity. So right now, is the rise in interest for CBDC a case of financial inclusion or control? That's the first question. The second question is, how do we balance the promise of freedom by cryptocurrencies and the government entry into the space?
Thank you so much, Coyote. You know, I find your 2-in-1 question quite interesting, because it's so relevant to what's happening today in the current events, what we're seeing in the news. Because data privacy has suddenly become forefront and so important, especially in building digital trust with your consumers as a provider, whichever service you're providing, but especially in financial services, because that's how you ensure your reputation and your name. So especially in the case of CBDCs, some questions have been arising on how is it really about financial inclusion or about control? And I think when we ask this question, we need to step back and think about what exactly do we mean by control, and think about those concepts that fall under it. And I think maybe we may mean in this case that we're thinking about, is it because that CBDCs come, even if they're complementary to cash when they are launched, but they come with the thought of, in the long term, we'll have reduced privacy in using them relative to cash? Because maybe you don't have anything to hide, you're not involved in any terrorist activities, you just don't want the government knowing that you like the lunch bar and you buy it a lot, especially maybe a certain time of period of the month, and you like your chocolate, but you don't want the government to know this. We're worried that CBDCs will eventually crowd out cash, or they'll even crowd out private sector payments. and they will end up being the monopoly in the space of payments. Control also may look like disintermediating banks if not properly issued and not planned out on how the issuance will happen. If a central bank finds itself in an era where they are directly issuing it and then they are dealing with the consumers themselves, where a central bank is in no place to be dealing with consumers one-to-one and should be issuing it through the banks to ensure that the banks are not disintermediated. And then it also brings up the question of it's going to be centralized at the central bank, all of our information. How do you decentralize the access of all of that data? And so then it brings you down to the real question of, is the great popularity in CBDCs by central banks due to them wanting access to all of our information? Is that why it's rising? Do they want to step into our lives and know everything? Where's the governance in that data that only gives them the information that they need to know as the central bank for their mandate purposes, and delineates between each government ministry, department, and gives them what they need to know for their function and nothing more? So data minimalization. And especially for Africa, where a lot of our countries have developed their data privacy and protection laws, but most of them are still working on enforcing them. So there's a high risk there because there's no enforcement, even though the law is there. And this is where this question would be answered, especially in the design process of the central bank, of the CBDC, because that's when questions of concerns of CBDC issuance come up to address such concerns. And you think about how will the CBDC be issued? What are the concerns of the people? Do the people even trust the government? If you look at corruption indices for most African countries, they're quite high. So already seeing that there might be low user uptake. Now, will the government then mandate that everyone has to use the CBDC? In which case, civil society members who should be consulted probably weren't, and there'll be mass retaliation from the people. So, if it is covered under the umbrella of financial inclusion, countries will find themselves with an even bigger problem than financial inclusion, as they are worried if they do not engage with all the relevant stakeholders. And this is particularly when they want to issue a retail CBDC. Because if they only want to issue a wholesale one, they won't be under so much scrutiny. But once you start dealing with the individuals or the consumers in their everyday life, you have to work around serious human rights questions, because privacy is a human right. I have the right to be let alone. And so it brings those bigger questions into play, into the discussion. And even on the technological aspect, most of our countries don't have great electrical connections that are constant all the time, and there are massive cybersecurity concerns. So even if the system is built to control us, is it sustainably controlling us? What other people can hack the CBDC system and gain access to our information? It becomes an even bigger problem. So this question really goes back to the regulators who are working on these projects in their different countries, that they have to be developing the scheme or the CBDC with being very prudential, with a lot of thought, and working with all the key stakeholders, including especially the private sector, with the payment service providers, the banks, with civil society, and especially with other regulators within their context. And it has to be context specific. You can't look at how Ghana did it, or how Ghana's working on it, how Nigeria did it. You can't. You can learn from the work that they did. But as I'm from Eswatini, and Nombumelelo Smelane also in the chat to type that she's from Eswatini, we used to work together when I was at the Central Bank of Eswatini. A lot of thought has to go in this, and people need to be spoken to so that everyone can trust that this is not a system of control, because it's very easy to think that. No one can be blamed for not trusting and thinking, especially in our continent where a lot of countries are under a lot of political instability right now. Do we trust our governments? And to look at your second question on balancing the promise of freedom by cryptocurrencies and the government's entry into the space, it's easy to think about cryptocurrencies as the ultimate freedom. But then when you look at what happened with FTX and Alameda Research recently, you then see some form of need for regulation to enter the space, even minimally, because the consumers were not protected and their funds were not protected. And the crypto exchange can get out stock free if they have the right lawyers, because there was no explicit regulation that says these funds must be protected under some form of trust account with these institutions. And that's why they could do anything they wanted, move the funds from FTX to Alameda Research, move them back and forth and perform risky transactions this side or that side. So I know sometimes it's easy to see the regulator as the eavesdropper who wants all your information to bully you and to just steamroll and say no to every innovation. But there's also another side of the regulator that is there for consumer protection, because where are those people now with their large investments for using their pensions? They're under a lot of stress, because down at the end of it all, we are all human beings. And the spirit of Africa is Ubuntu, or Ubuntu, that I am because you are. We help each other. And so even in that spirit, aren't we considering that maybe per se the government is coming in, but should be coming in with caution and not trying to quell in innovation, but enable it to protect consumers at the very least? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Noazi. This is more like philosophical response because I like the balance from the background and also the reality of even questioning your innovation. I mean, is it really worth it? And also looking at the global best practice of privacy. Right now, Facebook and Apple are paying millions already to US citizens for invading their privacy. So privacy is actually very expensive. You have to make sure you are very careful and you honor people's privacy. I just want to chip in briefly, Nwazi. Is it the reason why anything really happened to the in-era? Is that the same condition, or there's something new about the in-era concept?
In my research about the in-era, I think because most of the work was done using a template from the advanced world, I think some of the design choices need to be reconsidered, and some of the technology choices need to be reconsidered to fit the Nigeria context specifically. And that's why I always emphasize that context is so important. You can learn from what others have done. Yes, peer learning is always encouraged. However, you can't learn and then copy and paste. Because what France does, recently they just published the work they did, I think it was today, with Luxembourg, that they were doing testing with CBDCs, and it was a great success. Great, let's learn how you did it. And the various projects with the innovation hubs, with BIS, Project Dunbar, with South Africa, Australia, and other reserve banks testing cross-border payments using mBridge. There's so many projects to explore around CBDCs, and you can learn so much from them. But take your learnings and then apply them to your context, your people. Like, we in Eswatini are a small population, 1.2 million. You can't take the CBDC plans of the US and how big they are and then just apply as is in a small country that is 70% rural, that still has network connectivity challenges and mobile phone access challenges that they don't have in America. So I think as much as the universal access was the goal for the e-Naira, and is still the goal for the e-Naira, some work still needs to be done to make it come to the context of Nigeria.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I would like to move quickly to Monica. So similar to what I asked Noazili, looking at control or understanding of control and government. I mean, who are the stakeholder at PAPSS? You know, that's the first question. And the second question in that regard is, is there a possibility of infusing right now the CBDC into the PAPSS framework?
Okay, both great questions. So first, in terms of the key stakeholders at PAPSS, so we have the stakeholders at the African-wide level. So for example, we have the African Union and specifically also the AFCFTA and the Secretariat. So they are our partners in terms of what we are doing, as well as Afreximbank, because we sit within today we sit within the Afreximbank structure as a semi-autonomous division. And then because of what we're doing in payments, we are and we have been a very central bank centric system. So the PAPSS organs today, we start with the highest regulating organ, which is the PAPSS Governing Council. And here we have the central bank governors representing the central banks and their mandates in payments. And they also have a delegated authority, which is a PAPSS Oversight Committee, which then specifically looks into the oversight of PAPSS. So central banks, very key stakeholders for us. And then we look at, you know, the entities, the organizations that help us to reach the last mile. So these are commercial banks, fintechs, switches. So for us, we provide the rails, and then through them, you know, we're able to reach the end customer, the person who actually benefit from being able to use PAPSS. So in terms of CBDCs, so we have two central banks that have already explored this. I know Nowazi spoke about, and yourself as well, you spoke about Nigeria and the e-Naira. We also have Ghana, who are doing some work on the e-Cedi. And for us, we definitely see a major role for CBDCs in the framework of PAPSS. Our current structure allows us to do this, taking into consideration some of the concerns that haven't been addressed as far as CBDCs are concerned. You know, the regulatory and legal aspects, the compliance, AML and KYC aspects. So for us, we have a structure that facilitates that. So I think with that, we believe that we can have a framework in place for CBDCs.
Okay, so I mean, in the future, at least not immediately from now, we can, when they fully launch CBDC, we also be implemented on PAPSS platform.
Oh, yes.
Oh, interesting. That's a good one. So I'd like to also move to Noazi. There's this question, topics around volatility, which I would like to read out. I mean, digital asset cannot be money by standard due to their volatility geared by the fact that they are not backed by any current currency or any asset of value. In this regard, we'd like to know, I mean, how do CBDCs guarantee against anything against digital asset volatility?
This is an excellent question. It's an exciting one, actually, because this goes back to the definition of a CBDC and then helping you see the difference between why digital assets are not money or cryptocurrencies, even though this is the currency in the name. So as I said before, a CBDC is the liability of the central bank. So just think of your physical cash which has value because it is the liability of the central bank and under all the laws and forex law exchanges and all of that legal backing behind its value. That same digital token or that digital currency that is issued by the central bank, because it is a liability and issued by the central bank, carries the same value as the physical cash that you carry. Whereas other digital assets such as cryptocurrencies, stable coins, or e-money even or central bank cash where there's no deposit insurance, for example, are not the same. But let me concentrate on the ones that are not in the formal payment system or formal financial system. Your digital assets, cryptocurrencies, and stable coins are not the same because and considered are not money because they are on the decentralized financial system. They're not backed by anything, if I can say, solid or in the real world per se. They're not backed by a central bank currency or like a financial regulatory institution or a policy maker. So it's not a liability of a central bank or a ministry or a policy maker. And so what differs there is its characteristics, where if you think about a CBDC, it has the three qualities of money: store of account, unit of value, means of exchange. Cryptocurrencies, means of exchange, not a store of value, not a unit of account. And then you move further. Yes, the two are digital. A CBDC offers instantaneous settlement. Some cryptocurrencies offer some instantaneous settlement and some don't, because then you're waiting for people to do the proof of work or proof of stake to validate that transaction. So the main differences in their definitions give you the reason why they're not the same, and therefore show you why the volatility of a CBDC will continue following the trajectory as it's following now when it's still in physical cash. Where if you're still doing FX exchange or looking to gain extra money from foreign exchange arbitrage and speculation, you can still continue. It's just that you no longer are carrying some 200 Rand notes in your wallet. They are in your, per se, maybe stored in your phone. If the CBDC is stored in, you can store it in your phone the way it's issued in your country. And that's why there's a difference in value and difference in trust levels between the two. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Coyote, you are muted.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. So thank you, Noazi. Monica, the question I want to ask you, I think you have actually answered them earlier by saying there's possibility right now of infusing CBDC on the PAPSS platform, because I was like, we're very skeptical of what stance will be. I mean, now that we're discussing about it, good that we have more information on that. Because the question could have led to, if not, is PAPSS also looking now, since talking about settlement, talking about building PAPSS on the blockchain framework? I mean, probably right now focus more on a private one than on a public framework. So again, as I mentioned, you have already answered the question if CBDC is going to be integrated. But if not, is PAPSS planning to put it on a blockchain based on security features and also able to decentralize the payment system on PAPSS?
Okay, so at PAPSS, in terms of CBDCs, I think for us, we look at it in two contexts. So the first one is in terms of like, what is the use case for it in the context of being able to do cross-border payments? So I think as Nwazi has explained earlier, from a local point of view, the CBDCs are approached as a financial inclusion aspect. So people who don't have bank accounts, for example. And then from the cross-border aspect, for us, you know, there's the aspect of remittances, There are many migrant workers in Africa trying to send money back home to other African countries. We see this as a good use case for that. And in this case, PAPSS then would want to play a settlement role, a centralized settlement role. And then the second way we look at it is in terms of being able to facilitate trade. And I think this is where the aspect of the blockchain then comes in, and then being able to link trade, which today is, it has a lot of fragmentation. So being able to link trade with payment, the exchange of goods with the exchange of money and the exchange of payments. So the context in which we would consider a blockchain is one that then allows the digitization of trade and for that to be linked to payments. So I hope that answers your.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And everyone, you can actually start asking your questions right now on the chat box, and at one point as well, we can also give room for people to actually unmute their mic and also ask the question. Also, we have picked some of the questions from those that registered ahead before now, which will be asking the panelists, and you can also ask your question as well. So Nwaze, I want to talk about capacity. Still, we're in Africa, and I want to focus this topic or discussion around happenings on the continent. So Monica talked about the CBDC project in obviously in Ghana and also in Nigeria. I don't know if Kenya is also working on South Africa as well, but I think they are doing research, same as Namibia. So in each of the banks, as we know, there's always technical unit. The tech guys that always try to help out in the infrastructure of the operation of the bank. In Africa, so far on the CBDC that we've known in Africa, most of the sandbox are not really done indigenously by Africans living in Africa. I mean, it's like in good, as I mentioned, it's from outside, is it Caribbean or America? I mean, is it that we don't have capacity in Africa to build a blockchain where we can lay out the CBDC, or what's actually the problem around letting a capacity on CBDC in Africa?
Thank you so much. I definitely am inclined to agree with you that some work needs to go into capacity building on the technical part aspects of digital currencies, on the infrastructure side, the technology infrastructure of blockchain, other distributed ledger technologies that may be of consideration, because in my experience as a teacher of our blockchain and cryptocurrency course, most of our students come into the course, so this is from their feedback at the end of the course, they come into the course and they say they know absolutely nothing. And that course is very basic, very at a very introductory level. And they feel like after the course, they've learned so much, they feel they know so much in the field. And I'm like, but we just touched the surface, guys. And so that already says a lot. So I think more capacity building efforts need to be done, obviously from an introductory level, with a path that takes them deeper and deeper to where they can physically understand the workings and the system workings, and understand when you say something like, no, Ethereum would be better for this, and this is why I say this, because of our already existing systems, it will work this way. No, the blockchain would work better because of this and this and this and so on. So I definitely agree with you that some ground needs to be covered in the continent and capacity building, even on other skills that support the function of the blockchain. As I mentioned before, the biggest concern within Africa is cybersecurity, where the World Bank has recognized this for CBDCs as a big risk, is a big skills gap in developing countries. And they've started a fund to fund capacity building efforts for cybersecurity, building cybersecurity skills as well. So there's a lot to be done in building the capacity to bring the participants, whether in regulation or in the private sector, around building their confidence in these topics to then apply them in work practically with confidence.
All right.
Um,
So,
okay, hello.
yeah. So, Monica, still talking about capacity, what does PAPSS actually mean for corporate SMEs and also individuals in the merchant space or trade space?
Okay, so let me start with the corporates. For the corporates, especially those who already are Pan-African based, then it means reduced costs in terms of payments. So again, just being able to take advantage of the instant payments in local currency. For the SMEs, this allows them, PAPSS especially allows them to have access to markets that they may not have today. So just to give you an example, in Ghana, they have done a lot of work in terms of being able to move a product such as cocoa into a manufactured good, so high quality chocolate products. And then the question would be, you know, if I am in Kenya, for example, I want to buy that, then how do I pay for it? And PAPSS would then allow you in Kenya to be able to pay using Kenya shillings so that the person in Ghana can receive Ghanaian cedis. And then for individuals, I think I mentioned it also in the context of the CBDs as well. It's the ability to be able to easily send remittance payments, whether you just want to send, say, a payment. If I want to send a payment to my sister, or I want to pay a bill for a family, then it's easier to do this without the costs that are usually associated with remittances and the restrictions in terms of, you know, transaction limits and yeah, the various challenges that are there today when you simply want to send person-to-person payments. So that's what PAPSS means for those different groups.
Yeah, all right, thank you. So I think at this point, I will pause and hand over to Michael to please coordinate us through the questions that have been dropped and direct it down to the panel so that it can be answered.
All right, thank you very much. Interesting session so far, and kudos to the speakers. So far we have two questions. The first question is from Nandi Hagana. So he or she asked about, he said, in the interest of advancing a Pan-African agenda, how feasible is a single African wholesale CBDC? And is it even necessary? Okay, so the second question is from Mo Foray. I can always repeat the questions whenever you want to ask, whenever you want to get the questions again. So the second question is from Mo Foray. So he said, what about tokens? Is there a way of structuring them to become financial assets?
So
hello, did you get me?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, let me repeat it.
You can go ahead.
No, I was thinking that I think Monica could start on Nande's question because it starts off on the Pan-African agenda, then I'll jump in.
Yeah, so for me, I think it always comes down to then what issue are we solving, and what you know, what use cases would we then use a single African wholesale CBDC for? I think for me today, and these are some of the challenges that we are trying to address at PAPSS, is that in Africa you have 55 countries, you have about 41 currencies. There have been many efforts to make to get even to a single currency. That has been quite challenging. So there would be so many implications, both from an economic perspective, dealing with countries at various levels of economic prosperity. There is the, you know, the capacity in terms of the knowledge that's needed to do this, the infrastructure that's needed to do this. And I genuinely believe that today we are already addressing a lot of these concerns, not all of them, but a lot of these concerns, especially using the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System. And, for example, some of the things we're doing is having this centralized system, reducing the cost, reducing the time. There are many things we still need to consider, such as, different anti-money laundering requirements, amongst other things. So for me, I am not sure. I'm not sure about the feasibility of having a single African wholesale CBDCs, and as well as the use case. For me, I see a use case, for example, for retail CBDCs, just because I believe that in terms of payments, there's a lot that's not being captured in the formal financial and banking structures today. So the only way to do this is to find an alternative means to be able to allow people who may be doing, for example, informal trade, who don't have access to bank accounts, who don't ordinarily deal with banks, as a way to to bring these payments into some sort of formalized structure. So for me, I feel that a retail CBDC may make more sense, but I believe there's already a lot of effort going into addressing the challenges that lie, especially in wholesale payments. So to answer your question, I'm not sure about the feasibility of that.
Thank you, Monica. To add on to what you're saying, so I also agree with you. I would, for Africa, especially with the PAPSS rails coming in excellently to support domestic CBDCs in Africa, it makes more sense as to view CBDCs coming in with the use case of making domestic payment systems more efficient, in the sense that from a retail perspective, it would provide more competition for domestic payment systems, for payment services providers, as the entry into the market is quite hard. And then when they join, initially costs are low, but then they start becoming oligopolies in their jurisdictions. And then costs rise for individuals. And you see how making remittances, where Africa is the most expensive in the world. And with the CBDC coming in as an alternative means of payment in the country, it brings in it takes down the concentrated market power of those few players in the payment services provision, and it takes away informational rents that they have, where they are the only ones to access such information from the payment service users or consumers. And then it brings the fact that with the CBDC, it makes it possible for monetary policy to be more efficiently executed, and then brings to the light those trading in the informal sector, because if they're using CBDCs, then you can see the activities, and they can also receive fiscal transfers more easily as well. So they can benefit, and they can also make tax collection more efficient. I know some people obviously want to run away from the tax collection part, but the transfer payments part is a nice incentive, and also then it will formalize that economic activity and make them get other benefits that other SMEs were getting, where they were struggling to formalize their work if they wanted to. So there's that benefit from the domestic side of a retail, but a wholesale single African currency, it also feels like it's erasing the uniqueness of each country in Africa in a sense. And that must be celebrated, even just thinking about it at a human level. The differences are celebrated and not just combined into how the world, like America, for example, thinks Africa is one country. We are not. Yeah.
Michael.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. I have a question. I just want to ask a quick question. So my question is, how does the International Monetary Fund, as the IMF, view global development, and implementation of the CBDC?
Some papers that I've read by the IMF on CBDCs, and I recently downloaded their work on CBDCs, but I haven't taken time to read it thoroughly. But I've seen that most of their work has been focused on the legal aspects and the legal side of CBDCs, which is very important because some countries are jumping into the research and not looking back to see what their definition of legal tender is and whether it considers a digital currency as legal tender. Because then it means they must start with their legislation and start the groundwork there, and then then continue with the work in improving that aspect before they even jump in and think about who should be our technological partner, what use case do we need in our country. We need to go back and fix the foundations and then see what our country needs from a CBDC, or what it can benefit from a CBDC. So the IMF has been looking at CBDCs from the legal perspective and from the payments perspective so far, and I'm enjoying their research. So you should keep an eye out. But the most publishing institute on CBDCs has been the BIS, which I follow like crazy. So yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. It's really been a pleasure having the bright mind, the expert, Noazi, and also Monica telling us about CBDC and also PAPSS. I mean, for me personally, I've learned a lot, especially about the context, and also PAPSS helping us to facilitate trade from one African place to other. I mean, it could be very difficult to make trade within our same African brother and sister, and good that PAPSS is stepping up onto that. And more that when CBD has become a mainstream in Africa, PAPSS also is still available to assist us to make this particular point of payment. Thank you very much, Monica. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much, Wazi. It's a pleasure to have you. I don't know if you guys have some last word before we close this webinar.
Well, I don't know whether to go first or to let Nwanzi take the floor fast. So yeah, I think for me it's been such an engaging and exciting conversation. I think it is so interesting to see the potential of CBDCs, especially in the context of Africa, in the context of the challenges being faced in Africa, especially the financial inclusion aspects, and for us from a PAPSS point of view, then being able to drive that in a way that that makes sense for easing payments across African borders. So I've really enjoyed the engagement and also hearing the views of both yourself and Nwasi.
Thank you.
I also like to say thank you for this engagement, this webinar. I've thoroughly enjoyed learning about PAPSS and learning about the depths of it. It's been exciting, and I've learned so much from you, Monica, and I've learned from our discussions as well. I hope we can engage in a similar discussion in the future. And I've thoroughly enjoyed the discussions and look at the different dimensions around CBDC and the considerations there. I definitely think the more discussions should be had around this, especially around African considerations, as not enough discussions have been had or not enough publications are out there for the African context. So I really enjoyed this time, and I want to say thank you to you all for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Again, I think some part of the question that was asked earlier was about if we want to do a CBDC training but I guess we'll get to everybody to know probably later next year. We can think about proper CBD training, also collaboration with PAPSS as well, to get as many executives as possible to know more about this technology back and forth. Again, thank you very much, everyone, and have a very good day. Bye-bye.